The message came in at 4:17 a.m. "We're stuck. Did you do this?" I stared at the screen for a few seconds while sitting in my apartment kitchen, drinking coffee and enjoying the quiet. 3 days earlier, my parents had made it crystal clear they didn't want me anywhere near their family vacation. Now they were stranded in another country. And somehow, that was my fault. I looked at the dozens of missed calls that had piled up overnight. My father had called 17 times. My mother had called 11. My younger brother had sent a stream of angry texts that became increasingly desperate with every message. The first few accused me of being petty. The next few demanded answers. The last few practically begged for help. I won't lie, seeing those messages felt good, not because I enjoyed watching people suffer, but because for the first time in my life, my family was experiencing the consequences of treating me like I didn't matter. I replied with a single smiling emoji. Then I locked my phone and went back to drinking my coffee. At that moment, thousands of miles away, my parents were learning a lesson they should have learned years ago. A lesson about respect. A lesson about gratitude. And a lesson about what happens when you tell someone they're unwanted while still expecting them to keep carrying your life on their back. My name is Ethan. I'm 29 years old, and until that week, I had spent most of my life trying to earn my family's approval. If you've ever been the responsible child in a dysfunctional family, you probably understand exactly what I mean. I was the fixer, the helper, the reliable one, the son who always answered the phone, the son who always solved the problem, the son who was expected to sacrifice his own happiness whenever someone else needed something. Meanwhile, my younger brother Jason was the golden child. Jason could do no wrong. If he forgot to pay a bill, it was because life was stressful. If he quit another job, it was because his boss was unreasonable. If he made terrible financial decisions, it was because he was still finding himself. Every mistake came with an excuse. Every failure came with sympathy. Every disaster became someone else's responsibility, usually mine. Growing up, I didn't realize how unhealthy this dynamic was. When you're raised inside a system, it feels normal. You don't question it. You just adapt. You learn that your role is to give while other people take. You learn that your feelings matter less than keeping the peace. You learn that being useful is the only way to receive affection. For years, I accepted it. I paid for things. I helped with emergencies. I drove across town whenever someone needed assistance. I loaned money I never got back. I listened to complaints for hours. I canceled plans. I rearranged my life. And every time I did, I told myself that family was worth it. Family sacrifices for family. Funny how that phrase only seemed to work in one direction. The older I got, the more obvious the favoritism became. When Jason wanted a new car, my parents helped him. When I bought my own car, nobody even congratulated me. When Jason moved apartments, the entire family showed up. When I moved, I spent the weekend carrying boxes by myself. When Jason got engaged, my parents threw him a huge celebration. When my long-term relationship ended, they barely asked if I was okay. Still, I kept trying. Part of me believed that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, and helped enough, eventually they would appreciate me. Eventually they would see me. Eventually I would matter. Instead, things got worse. The final disaster started with what was supposed to be a family vacation. My parents had always wanted to visit Europe. For years they talked about it but never actually planned anything. Then last winter they decided they were finally going. Of course, they immediately ran into problems. Flights confused them. Hotels overwhelmed them. Travel requirements frustrated them. So they called me, because that's what they always did. And like an idiot, I helped. I spent weeks organizing everything. Researching flights, comparing hotels, setting up travel plans, arranging international phone service, managing reservations, tracking payments, solving every problem they encountered. The entire trip slowly came together because I was handling all the complicated parts. My parents praised me constantly during the planning stage. For a while, I actually thought things were improving. Maybe this trip would be different. Maybe we'd finally have a chance to reconnect. Maybe all those years of distance and resentment could start healing. I should have known better. Because 3 nights before the flight, we all sat down for a family dinner. And before dessert was even served, my father said something that changed everything. Something that made me realize exactly how little I meant to them. A single sentence. One sentence that would eventually leave them stranded on the other side of the world. And when he said it, my mother laughed. That was the moment I stopped trying to earn their love. That was the moment I started planning my exit. And that was the moment their vacation became a disaster. Looking back now, I realize my father probably thought he was making a joke. The problem was that nobody at the table was laughing except him and my mother. The dinner took place 3 nights before the trip. We were sitting at my parents' house, eating takeout and discussing the final details of the vacation I had spent weeks organizing. Flight confirmations had already been sent. Hotel reservations were secured. Transportation arrangements were complete. Everything was ready. For once, there was no crisis to solve, no last-minute emergency. No forgotten booking, no missing document. Everything was running smoothly. At least until my father opened his mouth. The conversation started normally enough. Jason was talking about all the photos he planned to post online. His wife Emily was discussing restaurants she wanted to visit. My mother kept talking about how excited she was to finally travel overseas. Meanwhile, I was reviewing a few final details on my phone to make sure everyone had their documents. Then Jason suddenly laughed. "You know," he said, "this might be the first family vacation where nobody has to listen to Ethan complain." I looked up. "Complain about what?" Jason shrugged. "Anything, you're always so serious." I blinked. That was a strange accusation considering I had spent the last month doing free travel planning for everyone. Before I could respond, my mother joined in. "He's right." I laughed awkwardly. "What exactly have I complained about?" Nobody answered. Instead, they exchanged those little amused looks families share when they're all in on the same joke. Except I wasn't. I felt like an outsider watching a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. Then my father put down his fork. He smiled. And he said the sentence that changed everything. "You know what would make this trip even better?" Everyone looked at him. He pointed toward me. "It'd be better if you didn't show your face when we board." The room exploded with laughter. Jason laughed. Emily laughed. And worst of all, my mother laughed. Not an uncomfortable laugh, not a nervous laugh, a genuine laugh. The kind that comes from finding something truly funny. I remember sitting there frozen. For a second, I honestly thought I had misunderstood. Then my mother shook her head and grinned. "We're just trying to keep this vacation peaceful." More laughter. Jason nearly spit out his drink. I stared at all of them. Nobody seemed concerned. Nobody looked guilty. Nobody realized how cruel they sounded. Because to them, I wasn't a person sitting at the table. I was a target, a punchline, the family workhorse they had become comfortable disrespecting. For years, comments like that would have started an argument. I would have defended myself, explained why their words hurt, tried to make them understand. But something inside me was different that night. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I was finally seeing things clearly. Maybe I had simply reached my limit. Whatever it was, I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get emotional. Instead, I smiled. A calm, polite smile. Then I nodded. "Then I'll stay far away." The table went quiet for a second, not because they were worried, because they assumed I was joking too. My father chuckled. "See, he finally learned how to take a joke." Everyone laughed again, except me. Inside, something had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't hurt. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to defend myself. I was observing, watching, noticing, and what I noticed was fascinating. Nobody thanked me for planning the trip. Nobody acknowledged the work I had done. Nobody recognized how much time I had invested. The only thing they seemed interested in was mocking me. That realization hit harder than any insult, because it revealed the truth. I wasn't valued. I was useful. There is a huge difference. People who value you care about your feelings. People who value you respect your efforts. People who value you don't humiliate you for entertainment. People who find you useful only care about what you provide. The moment you stop providing, they stop caring. That dinner helped me understand which category I belonged in. The rest of the evening became strangely surreal. Everyone continued discussing vacation plans. My mother talked about sightseeing. Jason talked about shopping. Emily talked about taking family pictures. And I sat there quietly, realizing something important. Almost every single plan they discussed depended on me. The hotel reservation, the roaming service, several prepaid arrangements, the booking management account, the emergency contact information. A surprising number of things were connected to me because I had organized everything. Not because I wanted control, because nobody else could be bothered to handle the details. For years, I had accepted those responsibilities automatically. Now I found myself wondering something new. What would happen if I stopped? Not out of revenge, not out of spite, simply because I had finally been told the truth. They didn't want me there. My father had made that very clear. My mother had agreed. The rest of the family had laughed. So why was I still carrying responsibilities for people who openly wished I would disappear? The question followed me all the way home. That night I sat on my couch staring at my laptop. I opened the travel folder. Hundreds of confirmations, receipts, accounts, reservations, payment records, everything neatly organized. Hours and hours of unpaid effort. I scrolled through the files slowly. Then I remembered my father's words. "It'd be better if you didn't show your face when we board." I smiled, because suddenly I had an idea, not a dramatic revenge plan. Not anything illegal, just a simple decision. If they truly wanted me out of the vacation, then I would remove myself completely. And once I started looking at exactly how much of that trip depended on me, I realized something very interesting. Without me, their dream vacation wasn't nearly as secure as they thought. Most people imagine revenge as something dramatic. They picture shouting matches, threats, explosive confrontations, public humiliation. But the older I get, the more I've learned that the most effective consequences usually arrive quietly. No screaming, No warning, no spectacle, just reality showing up to collect a debt. The morning after that dinner, I woke up feeling strangely calm. For years, my family's behavior would have ruined my entire week. I would have replayed every insult, questioned myself, wondered if I was being too sensitive, tried to figure out how to repair the relationship. Instead, I felt clarity. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was simply looking at the situation honestly. And the honest truth was this: they wanted the benefits I provided. They didn't actually want me. That realization made everything easier. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started reviewing every detail connected to the vacation. The deeper I looked, the more absurd the situation became. Because despite acting like I was unnecessary, my family had built almost the entire trip around me. The original plan had started 6 months earlier. My parents wanted a European vacation but had no idea where to begin. My father hated researching travel. My mother struggled with online booking systems. Jason couldn't organize a grocery list, let alone an international trip. So naturally they called me. At first I didn't mind. I actually enjoyed planning. I compared flight prices across multiple airlines. I researched transportation options. I found hotels near major attractions. I calculated exchange rates. I created detailed itineraries. I even built a shared digital folder so everyone could access travel documents. Every problem became my responsibility, and every solution came from me. What started as a small favor gradually evolved into a full-time project. There were nights when I stayed awake until midnight comparing accommodations. Weekends spent reviewing travel insurance options. Lunch breaks dedicated to solving booking issues. Not once did I complain. Not once did I ask for payment, because I genuinely believed I was helping family. Now, sitting alone in my apartment, I realized something uncomfortable. Nobody had ever actually thanked me. Sure, they said thanks casually, the same way someone thanks a waiter for refilling water. But nobody truly appreciated the amount of work involved. To them, everything simply appeared. Flights appeared, hotels appeared, plans appeared, solutions appeared, like magic. Nobody thought about the person creating them. That person was invisible. I was invisible. I spent several hours reviewing account information. The more I investigated, the more connections I found. My email managed most reservation updates. My phone number served as the primary emergency contact. Several bookings were tied to accounts I had created. The international roaming package was under my name because I had arranged the family group plan. Even some hotel prepayments had been processed through a travel account linked to me before reimbursement occurred. It wasn't intentional. It was just easier during the planning process. At the time, nobody cared. Now those details suddenly mattered, very much. I wasn't looking for ways to hurt anyone. I was looking for ways to remove myself. There is a difference. If someone tells you they don't want you involved, the respectful thing to do is step away. That's exactly what I intended to do. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I considered ignoring it but answered anyway. "Hey!" Her voice sounded cheerful, far cheerier than someone who had laughed while her husband insulted her son. "Morning, morning." There was a brief pause, then she said something that made me laugh internally. "We need you to double-check all the reservations again. Not how are you? Not sorry about yesterday. Not even an acknowledgement of what happened. Just another task, another responsibility, another expectation." I closed my eyes. For years this was normal. Now it sounded ridiculous. "Why?" There was silence. "What do you mean why?" "I mean why? Because you're good at it." Translation: because nobody else wanted to do it. I smiled. "You'll be fine." Another pause. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll be fine." Her tone changed immediately, a little sharper, a little colder. "Ethan, stop being difficult." That sentence almost made me laugh out loud. Difficult. After planning their entire vacation, after handling every problem, after being publicly humiliated at dinner. I was the difficult one. Amazing. "No," I said calmly. "I think I'm done helping." The silence that followed felt different. For the first time, my mother sounded confused, not angry, confused, as if the family toaster had suddenly developed opinions, as if a tool had refused to function. "What's gotten into you?" There it was, not concern, not curiosity, just irritation that the machine wasn't working properly. I ended the call a few minutes later. The moment I hung up, something inside me settled. A final piece clicked into place. My family didn't see me as a son, not really. I was a resource, a backup plan, an unpaid assistant. And for the first time, that resource was becoming unavailable. That afternoon, I started making calls, reviewing policies, checking account permissions, verifying ownership details, learning exactly what responsibilities belonged to me and what could legally be removed. Every answer pointed in the same direction. A surprising amount, far more than my family realized. By evening, I understood something they didn't. The vacation they were so excited about was standing on a foundation built almost entirely by someone they had just told to disappear. And foundations have a funny habit. When you remove them, everything above starts to crack. People always imagine revenge as an emotional decision. They imagine rage, impulsiveness, someone losing control. The truth is that what happened next was probably the calmest decision I had ever made. There was no dramatic moment, no evil laughter, no master plan written on a whiteboard, just me sitting in my apartment with a notebook, a laptop, and a simple question. What happens when I finally stop carrying people who don't respect me? The answer turned out to be surprisingly expensive. For them. The next morning I started making changes, not illegal changes, not dishonest changes, just corrections. For years I had allowed my family to use my accounts, my credit, my phone plans, and my organizational systems because it made things easier. Now I was simply separating myself from arrangements that no longer involved me. If they didn't want me on the trip, then there was no reason for my name, my accounts, or my financial responsibility to remain connected to it. Simple, reasonable, logical. The first thing I handled was the international roaming package. Months earlier, I had created a group travel plan because it reduced costs for everyone. The account was under my name. The billing responsibility was mine. The family simply reimbursed me afterward. At least that was the idea. Several reimbursements never actually happened, not that anyone seemed concerned about that. I contacted the provider, removed myself, canceled the package. No arguments, no explanations, no drama, just a routine account adjustment. Then I moved to the travel management accounts. Because I had organized everything, most updates flowed through my email, reservation confirmations, flight alerts, schedule changes, emergency notifications. I transferred what could be transferred, removed what belonged to me, closed access where appropriate. Again, nothing malicious. I was simply stepping away from responsibilities connected to a vacation I was no longer part of. Every action felt oddly peaceful. For years I had believed saying no would make me feel guilty. Instead, I felt lighter. As if someone had removed a backpack full of bricks I didn't realize I was carrying. Around lunchtime, Jason called. I already knew why. Ethan. His voice sounded irritated. Yeah. Mom says you're acting weird. I laughed. That apparently was the official diagnosis. Not hurt, not disappointed, not exhausted, weird. What does that mean? You're being difficult about the trip. There it was again, difficult. Apparently refusing to provide unlimited free labor qualified as difficult. I thought Dad said it'd be better if I didn't show my face. Jason sighed. Oh my God, you're still upset about that? Interesting. When someone insults you, you're expected to forget it immediately. When you react, you're accused of holding a grudge. Funny how that works. I'm not upset. Then why are you acting like this? Like what? Like you're not helping. I nearly laughed. Not helping? The phrase echoed in my head, because that was the entire problem. My value to the family existed almost entirely through what I provided. The moment I stopped providing, they became uncomfortable, not because they missed me, because they missed my usefulness. I ended the conversation shortly afterward. The less I explain, the better. People who benefit from your sacrifice rarely understand your reasons for ending it. That evening, I reviewed the hotel arrangements. This was where things became interesting. The hotel booking itself wasn't canceled. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's vacation. But portions of the prepaid arrangements attached to my travel account required my continued participation. Without me, certain authorizations no longer applied. The travel company processed the changes automatically. No special requests, no tricks, just policy. The kind of policy nobody notices until it affects them personally. For the next 2 days, my family acted as though everything was normal. They continued posting excited vacation countdowns. My mother shared travel photos on social media. Jason bragged about the trip to friends. My father sent messages reminding everyone about departure times. Not once did anyone apologize. Not once did anyone ask how I felt. Not once did anyone reconsider what happened at dinner. Why would they? As far as they were concerned, I would eventually fall back into my usual role. I always had before. That was the mistake. People become addicted to patterns. When someone spends years fixing every problem, others begin assuming the help will never stop. The support becomes invisible, expected, automatic. Like electricity, nobody appreciates it until the lights go out. The day before departure, my mother called again. This time her voice sounded unusually sweet. Whenever she used that voice, it usually meant she wanted something. Hi, honey, I almost smiled. Honey, interesting choice. What do you need? A brief pause, then she laughed nervously. Nothing. That was a lie immediately. I just wanted to make sure everything is ready. Everything, not me. Not our relationship. Everything, the vacation, the logistics, the work. I looked out my apartment window. The sky was turning orange as the sun began setting. For the first time in years, I felt completely calm. Everything should be exactly the way you wanted. Another pause, then she thanked me. But even that sounded automatic, like a customer thanking customer service, not a mother speaking to her son. We hung up. The next morning, my family boarded their flight. I didn't go to the airport. I didn't send farewell messages. I didn't check flight status updates. Instead, I went to work. A normal day, a peaceful day. For nearly 12 hours, I heard nothing. No texts, no calls, no emergencies, just silence. Then, shortly after midnight, my phone exploded. One call, then another. Voicemails, texts, missed calls, dozens within minutes. I stared at the screen. A slow smile spread across my face, because I knew exactly what had happened. The vacation had finally reached the point where my absence mattered. And thousands of miles away, my family was discovering just how much of their dream trip had been resting on the shoulders of the son they told to disappear. The first text arrived at 12:43 a.m. Mom, call us immediately. 30 seconds later came another. Dad, this isn't funny, call now. Then another, and another, and another. By the time I picked up my phone, I had 23 unread messages and 14 missed calls. I leaned back on my couch and slowly scrolled through them. At first, the messages sounded angry, then frustrated, then worried, then desperate. It was almost like watching the stages of grief in real time. Finally, near the bottom of the list, I found the message that made me smile. We're stuck. Did you do this? I set the phone down and laughed. Not because I enjoyed their suffering, because I knew exactly how they got there. For years, my family had treated me like a backup generator, something that only mattered when the power went out. Well, the power had finally gone out, and suddenly everyone remembered I existed. My phone rang again. Dad, I let it ring. A minute later, Mom called, then Jason. Then Dad again. Eventually Curiosity won, I answered. The moment I said hello, my father's voice exploded through the speaker. What the hell did you do? No greeting, no explanation, no details, straight to accusations. I calmly took a sip of water. What are you talking about? You know exactly what I'm talking about? I didn't, not specifically. There were several possible disasters unfolding at that moment. I needed more information. What happened? There was a pause. Then my mother grabbed the phone. Her voice sounded panicked, not annoyed, not irritated, actually panicked. Ethan, the hotel says our reservation isn't fully paid. Interesting, I said nothing. She continued. They said some authorization disappeared. I nodded to myself. That made sense. Travel account changes often create authorization issues, especially when linked services are removed. Still, I kept my voice neutral. Okay, she snapped. What do you mean okay? What would you like me to do? That question stunned her, I could tell. For years, I never asked what they wanted me to do. I just solved the problem automatically. Now they actually had to say it, and saying it out loud revealed how ridiculous their expectations were. We need you to fix it. There it was, the magic phrase, we need you to fix it. Not because I was on the trip. Not because they respected me. Not because they cared about me, because something broke. And broken things were my responsibility, at least in their minds. I stayed quiet. My father grabbed the phone again. Stop playing games. I'm not. Then help us. I looked at the clock, almost 1 a.m. Thousands of miles away, they were standing in a hotel lobby, probably exhausted, probably embarrassed, probably realizing they didn't understand half the systems I had managed for them. For a brief moment, I almost felt bad. Then I remembered the dinner. I remembered the laughter. I remembered my father's smile when he told me not to show my face. The guilt vanished. Didn't you say the vacation would be better without me? Silence, complete silence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Because for the first time, they were being forced to connect their actions with the consequences. Eventually, Dad muttered, "That's not the point." Of course it wasn't. It never is when consequences arrive. The point is always whatever problem exists right now. The past suddenly becomes irrelevant. Funny how that works. Before I could respond, another voice appeared. Jason. And judging from his tone, things were getting worse. Forget the hotel? What? The phones. My mother sounded confused. The phones? Our phones stopped working. I nearly laughed. The roaming package, of course. Without that service, they were dependent on finding local alternatives. Something I normally would have arranged before departure. Jason continued talking. We can't call anybody. We can't access half our travel information. We can't receive verification codes. His voice grew angrier with every sentence. Not because he was scared, because he was finally experiencing responsibility. And responsibility was unfamiliar territory for Jason. I listened quietly. Then another detail emerged. The transportation reservation from the airport had failed because confirmation messages never reached them. The backup booking information was stored inside an account nobody could access. The emergency contact information had reverted after system changes. Small problems individually, a disaster collectively, every inconvenience that I normally prevented was now happening naturally. No sabotage, no tricks, just reality operating without me, and reality was apparently very inconvenient. Over the next 2 hours, my phone became a battlefield. Calls, texts, voicemails, demands, accusations, pleading. The emotional progression was fascinating. First they blamed me, then they blamed technology, then they blamed customer service, Then they blamed bad luck, anything except themselves, anything except the obvious truth. They had spent years depending on someone they didn't respect. Now that person was gone. Around 3 in the morning, a new player entered the game. My aunt, Dad's older sister, the family peacemaker. Her message appeared unexpectedly. "Call me when you're awake." That alone told me things were serious, because my parents only involved extended family when they couldn't control a situation themselves. I decided to wait until morning. There was no emergency. The world wasn't ending. Nobody was dying. They were simply dealing with problems that responsible adults solve every day. The next morning, I woke up to 57 unread messages. 57. In less than 8 hours, I made coffee, sat down at my kitchen table, and started reading. Some messages blamed me, some demanded explanations, some begged for assistance. But one message stood out above all the others. It came from my father, a man who almost never admitted needing anyone. The message contained only 5 words. "We can't fix this ourselves." For the first time in my life, he was finally telling the truth, and the disaster was only beginning. By the 3rd day of their vacation, the situation had completely fallen apart. Not the vacation itself, the family. The carefully maintained illusion that everything was fine, the illusion that I was the problem, the illusion that they could treat me however they wanted and still rely on me whenever things became difficult. That illusion was dying, and everyone was panicking. I was halfway through my lunch break when my aunt finally called. Unlike my parents, she didn't start yelling. She sounded tired, very tired. "Ethan." "Hi, Aunt Karen." There was a long pause, then she sighed. "What happened?" Not "what did you do?" Not "why are you being difficult?" Just "what happened?" For the first time, someone was asking the right question. I leaned back in my chair. "How much have they told you?" Another sigh. "Mostly that you're refusing to help." I laughed, of course. That was the story, not years of disrespect, not the dinner, not the insults, just Ethan refusing to help. The family had always been good at simplifying situations until they became convenient. I decided it was time for somebody to hear the full version, so I told her everything. The planning, the months of work, the unpaid hours, the accounts, the responsibilities, the dinner, my father's comment, my mother's laughter, Jason joining in, every detail. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't add drama. I simply told the truth. When I finished, there was silence, a long silence. Finally, she spoke. "He actually said that?" "Yes." "And your mother laughed?" "Yes." Another pause, then she said something that surprised me. "Ethan, that's awful." Those 3 words hit harder than I expected, because nobody in my family had ever said anything like that before. Nobody had acknowledged the hurt. Nobody had validated my experience. Nobody had treated me like a human being with feelings. For years, every conflict ended with me being told to move on. Be mature, don't create drama, keep the peace. Now somebody was finally saying what should have been obvious. It was awful. The call ended shortly afterward. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Apparently my aunt had decided she was finished protecting my parents from their own behavior. Because within hours, the entire extended family knew what had happened. And suddenly the narrative started changing. Fast, my cousin Rachel called first, then Uncle David, then another cousin, then another aunt, one after another. The same question every time. "Is it true?" I told them exactly what happened. The response was almost identical every time. Shock, disbelief, anger, not toward me, toward my parents. Because once people heard the full story, the situation looked very different. It wasn't a son abandoning his family. It was a family humiliating someone who had spent months helping them, and then acting shocked when he stopped helping. Amazing how context works. Around dinner time, my phone rang again. "Dad," I answered. This time he wasn't angry. He sounded exhausted, defeated. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize his voice. "Ethan, yeah, people are calling us." I smiled slightly. "I know." A long silence followed. Then he said something I never expected to hear. "You told everyone." "No." Another pause. "I told one person." Technically true. The rest spread naturally. Dad sighed heavily. For years, that sigh had been enough to make me feel guilty. Now it did nothing. "Your aunt says we're wrong." That statement was so absurd that I nearly laughed, not because she was wrong, because he sounded genuinely surprised, as if the possibility had never occurred to him. "What do you think?" Silence, more silence. Then something remarkable happened. For the first time in my life, my father couldn't defend himself. There was no excuse, no explanation, no justification, because there wasn't one. Eventually, he changed the subject. "Your mother is upset." Of course she was. People often become upset when accountability enters the room. "What does she want me to do?" "Help." The answer came immediately. Not apologize, not reconcile, not talk. Help, always solve, always fix. I almost admired the consistency. "Dad, what? You told me not to come?" "It was a joke." There were 4 people laughing. He didn't answer because he couldn't. We both knew it wasn't a joke. Jokes are supposed to be funny for everyone. That dinner had only been funny for the people doing the laughing. Eventually, he hung up. Not because the conversation was resolved, because there was nothing left to say. The next few days became increasingly chaotic. Their vacation budget exploded because emergency solutions cost more money. Alternative transportation cost more money. Last-minute bookings cost more money. International assistance cost more money. Everything cost more money. And every unexpected expense reminded them of something uncomfortable. Most of it could have been avoided. Not because I sabotaged anything. Because planning matters, preparation matters, the work I did mattered. For years, my family treated those efforts as invisible. Now they were finally seeing the value, the expensive way. Then on the 6th day of the trip, my mother sent a message. Not an accusation, not a demand. A single sentence. I didn't realize how much you actually did. I stared at the screen for a long time, because after 29 years, that might have been the closest thing to recognition I had ever received. But the message arrived too late. Some lessons cost more than money, and my family was about to learn the most expensive lesson of all. The final day of their vacation should have been memorable for all the right reasons. Instead, it became the day everything finally collapsed. Not the trip, not the finances, the family dynamic, the system that had existed for nearly 3 decades, the system where I gave and everyone else took, the system where I was expected to sacrifice while others enjoyed the rewards, the system where respect flowed in one direction. By the time my parents returned home, the damage was impossible to ignore. The vacation had cost thousands more than expected. Emergency expenses piled up. Last-minute arrangements drained their budget. Unexpected fees appeared everywhere. Nothing catastrophic, nothing life-ruining, just one expensive consequence after another. The kind of consequences that happen when the person handling all the details is suddenly gone. But money wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that everyone now knew why it happened. My aunt had talked. My cousins had talked. The story had spread throughout the family. Every relative now knew about the dinner. Every relative knew what my father said. Every relative knew my mother laughed. And every relative knew that the family vacation disaster happened after they pushed away the person who built it. For the first time in my life, my parents couldn't control the narrative. The facts were too simple, too obvious, too embarrassing. A week after they returned home, my father called, not texted, called. That alone was unusual. Dad hated emotional conversations. Whenever feelings appeared, he usually disappeared. I answered, "Hello." There was a long silence, then he cleared his throat. "Ethan." "Yeah." Another silence. I waited. Finally, he spoke. "I owe you an apology." I almost dropped the phone, not because I was emotional, because I genuinely never expected to hear those words, especially from him. My father wasn't the kind of man who admitted mistakes. Growing up, he could crash his car into a tree and somehow convince himself the tree was at fault. Hearing him apologize felt like witnessing a solar eclipse. Rare, unexpected, almost unnatural. I shouldn't have said what I said. I remained quiet. I was wrong. Another pause. Your mother and I were wrong. Part of me wanted to celebrate. For years I had imagined this moment, the acknowledgement, the accountability, the recognition. But when it finally arrived, it felt strangely empty. Because apologies don't erase years. They don't magically undo damage. They don't rebuild trust overnight. They simply acknowledge reality. And reality was that I had spent most of my life accepting treatment I never should have tolerated. "I appreciate that," I said. Dad sounded relieved, as if he expected everything to be fixed immediately. As if the words alone solved the problem. Then he made a mistake, a familiar mistake. "So, can we move past this now?" There it was, the shortcut, the attempt to skip the difficult part. Because admitting fault is easy compared to changing behavior, I sighed. "Dad, what? Moving past something isn't the same as pretending it never happened." Silence. "You spent years treating me like I only mattered when you needed something." No response. "You told me I wasn't wanted." Silence. "You laughed when I was humiliated." Still nothing. Finally he spoke. "We didn't mean it that way." Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. At that point, it didn't matter. Intentions don't change outcomes. If someone steps on your foot accidentally, it still hurts. The pain doesn't disappear because they didn't mean to cause it. We talked for another 20 minutes. The conversation remained respectful, calm, honest. For the first time ever, I wasn't trying to protect his feelings. I wasn't trying to keep the peace. I was simply telling the truth, and surprisingly, he listened. Not perfectly, not comfortably, but he listened. When the call ended, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because everything was fixed, because I had finally stopped carrying responsibility for everyone else's emotions. A few days later, my mother called. That conversation went very differently. Unlike Dad, she wasn't interested in accountability. She wanted sympathy. She wanted reassurance. She wanted someone to tell her she wasn't the bad guy. I didn't. The call ended quickly. Some people grow from consequences. Others spend their lives arguing with them. Mom chose the second option. Jason wasn't much better. To this day, he still insists the entire situation was an overreaction, which honestly doesn't surprise me. People who benefit from unfair systems rarely notice they're unfair. From their perspective, everything was working perfectly. The only problem was the moment it stopped. As for me, my life improved dramatically. I stopped answering every crisis. I stopped solving every problem. I stopped saying yes when I wanted to say no. I created boundaries, real boundaries, and something fascinating happened. The world didn't end. Nobody died. The sky didn't fall. The only thing that disappeared was the exhaustion, the resentment, the feeling that my worth depended on how useful I could be. 6 months later, I used the money I would have spent rescuing everyone from their mistakes and took my own vacation. Alone, no demands, no drama, no emergencies, just peace. On the second night of that trip, I sat on a balcony overlooking the ocean and thought about the message that started everything. "We're stuck. Did you do this?" At the time, I wasn't sure how to answer. But now I know, no, I didn't do it. They did. The moment they decided I didn't matter, they created their own disaster. All I did was stop protecting them from the consequences. And sometimes, that's the most powerful revenge of all.